this is 4th of July, and I want to talk a little bit about freedom. And then I also want to talk, with going through VBS and with everything else, just want to talk about children, put the two together. Life is so good if you will just do what Jesus said, and that is to live in peace, relax. If you do like the song said, the kids were singing about forgiveness, just forgive. I tell you, forgiveness is all about setting you free. Unforgiveness puts you in a bondage of emotion and ties you up and keeps you repeating broken relationships and stress. Everything Jesus asked us to do was for our benefit.
Excuse me.
Man. Anybody got any idea where that's coming from? You guys? Oh. Thanks, guys. So, I was also just thinking about the freedom that we've experienced in America for all these years and the price that was paid for it. And yet, some of it's being whittled away, or a lot of it is, without us even knowing it sometimes. So I want to read this that Paul wrote. Galatians, the 5th chapter, verse 1. It says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, Christ will be of no benefit to you. And I testify again to every man who receives circumcision that he is under obligation to keep the whole law. You have been severed from Christ, you who are seeking to be justified by law. You have fallen from grace." We got it yet? "For we through the Spirit by faith are waiting for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but faith working through love." Let me just stop there and say, a lot of this doesn't seem to pertain to us because we're not Jews. We didn't grow up with the law, and we didn't grow up with doing the circumcision as a way of becoming righteous. So it sometimes we can read over it and not really let it penetrate us. But he's really talking to us. He's talking to us about anything that you and I do to win favor with God, to get right with Him in any way, to please Him in any way. Anything that we do that we put confidence in is the same thing, that it is actually severing us from the relationship with Christ. It actually is a huge hindrance. And this is so easy to do. This is just so easy to do. I shared it in the funeral that when Casey Tim heard me preach the first time, I was doing a wedding for a friend, an outside wedding. We had an aisle of Harley Davidsons there. The bride wanted to wear black, but her mother wouldn't let her. She wanted to have a black cake. She just didn't, and it was a tough go. And so, but I decided to do the wedding and for the very first one, and most of the people there were intoxicated. The best man had his best T-shirt on, and it was just everybody's pretty well wiped out, and I think it's only about noon. For a young preacher, I tell you, some of this, he'll challenge you, like, what am I doing? And yet I decided, well, listen, they asked me to do this, so I'm going to do it the way I feel led. And I preached the gospel, man. I told them about the goodness of God. Didn't condemn them, just put all the hope and faith I could into it. And I remember Casey Tim, he came up, and he was pretty well soused, and he came up and said, "John, that's the best blankety blank sermon I've ever heard." And I took it as a real compliment. And then he said, "John, I should get my children in church and get a little religion in them." And I remember I looked him straight in the eye and just said, "Casey, whatever you do, I'd recommend that you don't do that." And then I walked away deliberately. And I remember trying to look over my shoulder and just kind of see him kind of bewildered. Like, what in the world did he just say? I thought I'm sure he thought I was going to say that'd be a good idea, Casey, and But I'm telling you, the more I go in life, the more I realize if you define religion as man's effort to get right with God, man's ability or gifts or whatever to get right with God, I'm telling you, you need to flee from religion. If we use that for a definition. And I'm telling you, our human nature and our flesh, we like to do things to feel like we're divinely connected with our Creator. We like to, and I'm not opposed, man. We do communion here, we do baptisms here, we've done foot washings, we've done a lot of things. But there are a lot of things that you can do, that sometimes put this form of godliness, And I'm not here to criticize anybody, but just say what I believe is truth. But, you can wipe a cup and you can do a lot of fancy little things. You can wear robes and do all that if you want to. It's all right. But I'm telling you, if you put any confidence at all in those things that are going to make you right with God, Paul is saying you're in big trouble. You are in big trouble. It's not just like it's not necessary or he's saying you're in big trouble if you do that. So that's what he's saying here. He's using the word circumcision because that's what the Jews put their confidence in, but you and I could put our confidence in a lot of things, including just church attendance, including just reading our Bible, including just, tithing and all those things. And we'll go on here. It says, and he said, really, it's not that you do it or don't do it. It's just that it doesn't mean anything in your relationship with God. Verse 7, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion did not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you shall bear this judgment, whoever he is. Now listen to the tone that Paul gets here. He says, but I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I being persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has become abolished. Would that those who are troubling you would even mutilate themselves. In the Greek, I don't know, my brother-in-law's here, the Greek professor, so I may get a reprimand later, but that's all right, I'm ever learning. But this word, from what I can get, is not a nice word. It's like, may you be hacked into many little pieces. And Paul is really disturbed about the person that is bringing this in, that wants to get people back into doing something ritualistic to get back in favor with Christ. And he also, I think, sometimes indicating, separate him out, get him out of your midst. Verse 13, for you are called to freedom, brethren. Man, isn't that great? Isn't that great? Isn't it great that when we stand up and wave our flag and 4th of July and blow off fireworks, and hope you don't get caught doing it in the wrong place. Isn't it great that God Almighty in His Word wrote to us that we were called, that Jesus died for our freedom. Freedom's a God word, not a man word. He said, for you are called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word and in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take care lest you be consumed by one another. I'll just throw in verse 16 because it's so good. Galatians is so good anyway. But I say, walk in the Spirit and you won't carry out the desires of the flesh. People that are struggling with the flesh, I always tell them, listen, if you quit trying to not walk in the flesh and just start walking in the Spirit, you won't fulfill the flesh. So many people are trying not to screw up. I actually got up this morning and went golfing with my son and my nephew, and when you try not to chunk it, you're going to really mess it up. You can't not do something. You got to do something. And if you got trouble with your flesh just giving you problem in any type of an area, there's so many areas that the flesh can't get control. If you get your mind off that and just start getting on what you want to do out of your heart and get Bible scriptures and walk with the Spirit of God, it's the Spirit of God to help you not just stop something, but to get involved in what you need to get involved in. So many people don't get involved in witnessing. I remember one brother way back 30 years ago. He was we're sitting after a church service or picnic or something, and he says, John, you know my problem I have, and it's really hindering me, and a lot of times I feel condemned about it, so I don't witness anybody or, when I should, and because of my problem. And he's going on, and I finally sat there, and, if you're getting a conversation and you don't know what's going on, but you hope you figure it out before it's your turn to talk, and I just sitting there and finally it came my turn to say something, and I just said to him, I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, I said, no, I don't know. And I thought, man, he's going to make this big confession, to me of something. And he said, well, I haven't been able to quit chewing tobacco. And I kind of just looked at him and said, that's it? That was all about that? He said, yeah. I said, you're letting your confidence be blown away to witness and to share with people the love of Christ because of chewing tobacco? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, forget trying to quit chewing. Get over it and get to witnessing and just let it be, man. Just, if you got to confess afterwards, by the way, I still chew tobacco. I mean, do it. I don't know, but get over it. A person's life is at stake for all eternity, and you're worried about something like that. But there's a lot of people do that. They know their problem, they know their temper, they know their depression, they know their discouragement, they know whatever vice they got going, and because of that, they feel unqualified to tell somebody about the wonderful good news of Jesus Christ, and they hesitate. And I bet we could go down the line today, and each one of you probably got a story that sometime you hesitated to share what you could have shared because you felt like you didn't qualify. And Paul is really addressing this thing, and he said, man, get rid of that attitude and just start walking in the Spirit. Just start walking. What's that mean? It just simply means live out of the thing that's in your heart, which is God. Just start loving people. Just start enjoying their company. And walk in this freedom. You have the freedom. You've been forgiven of everything. Even what you're going to do in the future, you've been forgiven of it. It is amazing how it doesn't take much condemnation for you to stop in your tracks and follow your heart. You'll hesitate. You'll not do it. And look at all that happens because we don't walk in this freedom. And this freedom was bought for us by, I look at it this way. This freedom was bought with an awful high price. It would be a dishonor to the one that paid it to not accept it. Casey Tim, again, he'd come to church there for a while, and he'd never been in church. I shared at his funeral that, he didn't know church etiquette. The truth is he did know. He just didn't want to do it. And he got by with this until the day he died. He knew things that were proper and right with people around him, but he would buck it. He bucked authority. And if you ever came in there in an authoritative way, he would not respond very well. If he thought you were preaching at him, he'd shut you down. And at the very last, here's a guy that's been bedridden for years now. His legs quit working, his arms stopped working. Totally. I mean, he would sit there and focus and couldn't raise his arm a bit. I don't know about you, but that's hard to imagine, isn't it? He's laying there 24 hours a day in the same spot in the bed, and all he can do is talk, and that was getting difficult. And I came in there one day, and it was a little tense, and he says, my wife tells me my mouth gets me in trouble all the time. and I just thought it was humorous. You may not understand it. You may think it's disrespectful, but when you went and saw Casey, you couldn't go in there. Everybody thinks they'd get depressed, so I wouldn't go see him, because here's a guy who can't do anything. But I left there always laughing and feeling great. I'm going to miss him terribly. And I walked in, and he said, man, that's all my wife says the only thing that gets me in trouble is my mouth. I said, Casey, you have nothing else to get you in trouble left. And you're going to get in trouble because you like getting in trouble. That's what he liked, Glory to God. But this freedom that we have, it was paid with a high price. And Casey was in church, and in the middle of the service, I'm preaching away, and he raises his hand. Remember that? Man, it's like, you see it out of in your peripheral view, there's a hand up, And I'm just telling you, as a preacher, you can preach a lot of stuff and still think. And you're thinking, I see that hand. Do I just keep not looking that direction? I'll preach to you guys for a while because he's over there raising his hand. And I finished my statement, but the hand stayed up. And I'll never forget, I thought, this is just too cool. Casey, I said, what's up? What do you got? He said, I got a question. I said, well, shoot. And like I said, you can maybe think that he didn't know, but I know he knew. He played that card well, of acting like a country hillbilly that didn't know. He played it well. He knew exactly what he was doing. And that's what's so fun to work with him. I said, Casey, what's up? And he said, John, I don't think he ever called me pastor, which is all right with me. He called me John. He said, John, what happens if you can't forgive yourself? Because I'd been preaching on forgiving others. He said, what if you can't forgive yourself? And with that, tears came to his eyes. Man, what an awesome question. In life, it's not the answers that are really going to set you free. It's having the right questions. Man, don't worry about having the right answers. Have the right questions. If you get the right questions, you're going to win in life. You ask Jesus the right questions. You ask your heart the right questions. Man, the answers will come to you. But if you ask the wrong question, you can't get a right answer. And you can ask your whole life the wrong question and never grow. Never grow. If I remember some of you, why did God kill all the people in the Old Testament? Why is this happening to me? And that question, if you want to ask it, it's great, but you're never going to get an answer out of that that'll bring any life to you. Man, you gotta figure out the right question. Casey asked the right question. What if you can't forgive yourself? And I sat there and I just said, Holy Ghost, I need help, on the spot, because it wasn't in my sermon notes. And I tell you, the answer impressed me, because he was asking God, not me, and God came through. And I said, Casey, when a man has paid a price like Jesus Christ paid for your freedom to be free and to have forgiveness, and you don't do it, it's a dishonor. It's a disrespect to the man who did it all. Because that answer is the right answer for Casey, because Casey understands honor. He understood respect. And I believe that from that day on, he worked very hard to forgive himself. And he worked through that. Christ died for our freedom. We have a freedom in not only America to worship and to grow and to prosper. There's been a high price was paid for that. I think about all our young men. It seems like, the more I go in life, the more it touches me. The prices that have been paid. There's a lot of young men, and I know a lot of young men. Nathan just says he hates to wear his uniform when he's in the airport because so many people walk up and shake your hand, and little kids start bringing you stuff, and people, stop and let you get off the plane, and he said, I don't want to do it because he said, I haven't gone overseas yet or whatever else. And I said, well, the honor is not really to you. The honor is to all the men and women who have served and will serve. And you don't know when you're going to be called up. A lot of the young men that were called up, and women that were called up, they weren't planning to give their life. They weren't in it to, sometimes it was just a way to get a college education. To be honest, if it had been just real honest, or to stay out of jail. But at the same time, they still gave their life. And I think, I think when I was over there in Luxembourg and with Cliff Lynn, and we went to the burial site of his brother. And his brother was 18 years old in that battle. And Cliff said he was a young boy. His brothers were older than him. He was born late in life. But he said he remembered hearing the story that his brother took shrapnel right away in the guts. And the policy was at that time on that particular battle, anybody that's got stomach wounds, belly wounds, you didn't save them. You didn't rescue them because they're too much chance they're going to die. And so you went with the highest odds that you had. And I thought about that. I thought, and Cliff said his young brother, his older brother at that time was only 18, but he said he's full of life, just loved life, just enjoyed life. And to think about that happening. And he said, he checked later and found out that the medic stayed with him the whole time and stayed with him 3 days. Said he easily could have been saved. They would have just pulled him back and done what they needed to do. But he didn't make it. Things like that just start impacting me the older I get on what the price has been paid for our freedom. And here I'm preaching to the choir here. I want to just tell you how proud I am. There are so many people that have such a disrespect for their freedom. They gripe, they moan, they have nothing good to say about anything. All they are is wanting their entitlement and every program that comes out, and they think they deserve everything, and they don't think they get out of work for anything because that's the way it's gone so far, and they have no clue what it took to get to this place where we have the freedom that we experience here in America. And I know there's a lot of crappy things going on, probably way more than I want to know. But I'm telling you, we still got the opportunity to live free and to preach this gospel around the world, to prosper, to go after business. We got it. I know there's a lot of things against us, but I'm telling you, there was a high price paid. And I'm telling you this, there's a high price to pay for letting it go by. Generations have lived their whole life never having any freedom, or very little. And through history, what history tells us is that most people, within less than a generation, will forget the price that was paid. They'll forget the privileges, and all they think is what they deserve. You know, you look back at William Wallace, you look back at the Knights of St. John. I still can't believe they haven't made several Grand Slam Hollywood movies out of the Knights of St. John. That's a story that's hardly told, but here the Knights of St. John started out as a medical unit, for the Crusades, but they ended up being some tough hombres holding back the Muslims that were coming across to Europe. And the Christian church at that time in Europe was fighting, bickering, and building cathedrals and all that, and we're not even aware, and we're not even concerned about the Turks coming in, and yet these Knights of St. John, just a few hundred of them, just about 300 of them, and some militia, held off one of the most awesome, well-trained armies of the world several times over a 300-year period. And the Turks had them, they were just like a thorn in their side. I won't go into it all, but if you've never read that story or never studied it, I'm telling you, it is more dynamic than any movie you'll ever watch. The courage of these people. In fact, at one point, they brought 70,000 Turks against these 600 guys on an island and just bombarded it with cannonballs for 3 months straight till the whole thing looked like nothing but a fire pit. Brought their men up, had guys the Turks had, they had trained warriors. They took their grunts or whatever else and just let them fill up the moat, so they could step on them. But the trained guys came in, and these were guys that were pulled from their family at the time of childbirth, so they had nobody to live for. They never saw their mom and dad, and they were huge, and they were trained. And these guys came in, and the battle went on, and the Turks had them. But the commander was so impressed with the Knights of St. John, their courage and everything else, he could not wipe them out, and he just finally called the battle off and said, "You guys find someplace else to live. I can't take you out. I've never seen courage like this in my life." And when you're just trained to be a killing machine, he went back to a leader back there and got reprimanded for that. I'm just saying there's been a lot of people, the same thing. There have been a few that have delivered us over and over through the centuries and really most of the time, never got honor till later. Most of the time, and all the time that these knights were doing this, the people in Europe was laughing at them and saying, they're a bunch of old hicks, from the past. They don't mean anything. And I'm telling you, you and I would not be in America today if they would have let that happen back then. All of history would have been written if they would have got through. And now here we're sitting on the same situation today. We're sitting with an Islamic nation that believes that their job from God is to kill every infidel, and that's you and me. And then people say, well, they're extremists. But if you just read their book, if that's what they got to do. And here it is. They're moving into every nation. And most people are blowing it off and saying, oh, don't matter. As long as I got my freedom right now, as long as you don't take my cable TV and my cell phone away from me, I'll be happy. No vision, no idea what's going on, no feeling, no sense of responsibility. But there's a few. And it's always been a few. It'll always be a few that have kept our freedom, that paid a price. There's always a few with the Jews. There's always a few, the Daniels. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Samuels, all the Davids and the Jonathans. Jonathan, as the Philistines were coming in, just said, well, God's not limited to win by many or by few. Let's go take him on. And he took his armor bearer and went to war. Man, there's some great stories of reality of great men and women who have stood up and fought for freedom and won so the rest of us could do what God has asked us to do. And then ultimately, Jesus Christ himself stood up in the face and gave up everything he had so you and I could have everything. And I say today, man, I want to just honor this day of freedom, of saying, I will not back off. I will not take it for granted. I will live my life. I will forgive myself. I will take the strength of the Lord, and I will run this race as hard as I can. And one thing that Casey ministered to me on is that one day, you've heard it over and over, but you ought to hear how often it goes off in my mind. When I sat there and looked down at him, and he said, I have no reason. And I'm telling you, time stopped. And I thought, I know what he's going to say. He's going to say, I have no reason to live. He said, because he was just telling me, he said, I can't do anything, John. I can't take care of myself. I can't help anybody else. That's what he was just saying. And then he comes up with that statement, I have no reason to leave. And I don't know why, but it stunned me. I thought for sure I knew exactly what he was going to say. And he didn't say it. He said, John, I have no reason to leave. He said, I've told my wife I want to live another decade. And then he said, but I told her, he said, but if you don't feed me, obviously I won't be here. So it's up to you. So at the very last there, I was asking Deb, now have you been feeding him? And she got a kick out of that. I have no reason to leave. And here's a man that can't use his legs or his arms, only his voice. And I thank God for it, because he ministered to me. And when I get ministered to, guess what? And I told him this. I said, there's thousands of people get ministered when you talk to me. Because I've taken that message clear to Philippines, Singapore, Burma, and all through my communications with and Jerry Williamson, who's preaching to 2 million, 3 million people in Africa, has taken the same thing and talking about KC, Tim, and the same thing. And I'm saying it here today. Why? Because we're celebrating our freedom. And I hope you flag-waving patriots or God-fearing people right now are being encouraged. Rise up. It is not over. I know everybody thinks that everybody's got their gloom and doom. I mean, this is not just Christianity. This is the whole world. Every generation and every tribe and every nation have got stories, and they all have stories of the end. How it's going to happen. The Incas had their prophecies. Hollywood makes more movies about the end times, aliens coming or something. And so it's like it preoccupies man. How's this going? We all know inside it's going to end someday. We all know that freedom's going to be, that the whole thing's going to cave in many ways. And there have been some dark times in the earth. Awful dark times, way more than you and I can ever even dream or imagine with what we've lived in. We've lived in the light. And so I think sometimes we don't realize it. We actually can be lulled to sleep and not realize. Sometimes I thought about just all those great heroes, and sometimes as a young boy you said, I want to be a knight of St. John. I want to be in that battle. I want to be on Normandy. I want to be a warrior for Christ. It's all in us, and yet at the same time, it's like you realize we're living at one of the greatest moments to stand up and be strong and to be courageous that the world's ever seen. Do you realize there's more people on the earth right now that have ever lived and died? Do you realize the opportunity to preach this gospel to all nations is finally in our hands? Do you realize that we have the greatest responsibility and opportunity of all generations? And yet most people have no idea that there's even a battle going on, that there's even anything to be concerned about. Their checks are coming in the mail, and their retirement's set, and their Social Security is coming in, and their IRA is up there, struggling. I mean, for most people, just when the stocks go down, that's the most depressing day. Oh, what are we going to do if we don't have a retirement? What are we going to do? And yet here it is in the life. You see, when you got freedom in Christ, you stop being self-centered. You're not worried about self anymore. You know self is taken care of. You know your eternal destiny. You know you got a Savior. You know that He'll take care of you. You know that even if you die, you're in good hands. But you also know this, that you're not going to waste this freedom on yourself. You're going to take this freedom, as Paul said, and love one another. Love the world. Love the people. And, growing up in a sparsely populated area like South Dakota, Vail, you can get to thinking that you're not too important. That all the important people come from the big places. Well, I think we figured out that the best leaders come out of small places because they had to learn leadership. I traveled the whole world, and some of the most phenomenal people in the body of Christ are people from obscure places and obscure backgrounds. Because they just didn't assume everything was going to happen for them. They thought, if it's going to happen, I'm going to have to make it happen. And they got values and they got things, that character that just stand up. And I'm just thinking, here we are in Believers Fellowship in Sturgis, South Dakota, and, big things happen all over. How important is it what we do? It'll be as important as we believe is how important it'll be. If you can believe it, it's going to be important. The easiest thing in the world is to brush it off. Say, my life doesn't count that much. I've screwed it up. It's, and so many people I meet are really, really, really more concerned about how they're going to finish out than they are about how this whole thing's going to finish out. As long as I can finish my race, as long as I can get through, as long as I got enough money I can pay for the rest home, as long as I got enough insurance I can get through that. And it's almost like, I would never encourage anybody to do what I do, but I'm a sitting duck. I'm out in broad daylight just standing around and waiting for somebody to shoot me. I don't mean that any other way than this, that according to world standards, I'm one foolish man. It's like Dave Hitton, if they pull my leg off, they're going to give me a plunger and some duct tape and say, see ya. There won't be any of those $500,000 legs being attached to me, because there ain't nobody going to pay for it. And sometimes I get concerned about me, and I think, man, what's going to happen if something happens to me? And then I think this: am I a believer? Am I a believer? Do I really believe this, or is it just something I think is a nice story? Is it something that just gives me a place to socialize with a few people? Or am I a believer in the one who died and paid a price for me and now said, I'll take care of you throughout all eternity. Now take this freedom and go love and go tell the story and go do whatever you can to help everybody else get there. And whatever it costs you, and it will cost you. Jesus never made any bones about this. It will cost you your life. He didn't say to John Williamson, he didn't say to you that, you'll be fine, you'll never hurt, you'll do fine. He said, no. He said, you lay your life down, you're going to get it. If you don't lay your life down, you're going to lose it. So those of us who made that decision, we already lost our life. There is nothing left to save. And now we can have it. Now if you turn your Bibles to Genesis. The 18th chapter. And I know there's things stirring in each one of you. That's why I'm sharing this just out of my heart today. Don't back off. Don't slow down. Don't give up. Everything the enemy wants to do is get you to think that your life doesn't count. Nothing's really important. You couldn't make a difference anyway. If you go to Genesis, the 18th chapter. And beginning with verse 1, 3 guys show up to Abraham's tent door, and he runs out there, and he says he knows they're from God. Calls them Lord, and he says, "Come on in if I found favor, and let me, feed you." This is interesting if you really think about it. I won't spend a lot of time here, but they said, "Okay, it'd be done, whatever you want to do." And Abraham running and tells Sarah, "We got company." Then he runs out and tells the servant, "Get that calf right there." And I thought, this wasn't like going to the freezer and pulling out a frozen roast beef and sticking it in the microwave, and see if you can get some lunch for somebody. Man, they got to go butcher that thing. And then, and he said, then he went and joined them underneath the tree, and then they sat there. So we had some time period here, while the calf is bellowing and say, "Why me? What did I ever do?" Anyway, and we get to verse 9. He says, "Then they said to him, 'Where is Sarah, your wife?' And he said, 'Behold, in the tent.' And he said, 'I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son.' And Sarah was listening at the tent door." Why not? It's a tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, 'After I have become old, shall I have this pleasure? My Lord being old also?'" Amazing what God can hear that nobody else hears. "And the Lord said to Abraham, 'Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I am old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, and at this time next year Sarah shall have a son.' Sarah denied it, however, saying, 'I did not laugh.'" Human nature hasn't changed a whole lot, has it? "For she was afraid," and he said, "No, but you did laugh." I don't know why. I think he's just humorous. Then the men rose up from there, and they looked towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed." Look at the purpose of God. The purpose of God was to get somebody that would believe him so he could get the nations blessed. And that's why he had to take out Sodom and Gomorrah, because it was a cancer that was taking out society, not because he's mad, bitter, and upset with them. It was a thing of helping mankind survive. And then we go to this. Verse 19. "For I have chosen him in order that he might command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right, by doing righteousness and justice, in order that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." If somebody go get Elisa and the children's church. We can get so easily caught up in our own life and our own situations. I think one reason sometimes we always think the world is going to end is it helps us to not feel like we're responsible for carrying it on. But God had a plan to bless us. Several thousand years later, God knew about all this that was going to take place. And he said, "I'm trying to find a man." And he said, "I found it in Abraham. I found a man where I can work through that I can bless him and make him into mighty nations so that he might be a mighty blessing to all the nations, to all the people for all times." God obviously has great vision. I remember a man told me once, he said, a definition, and I don't want to don't get off on this terminology. It's just the way the story came to me, okay? He said, the definition of a liberal is this. And I go, okay, what's that? He said, a liberal sees no farther than the hand in front of his face. Now, I don't want to get into liberal and conservative and all that, but the illustration is phenomenal. There are some people who look no farther than this. Whatever is happening in their life right now, whatever they need to feed their face, comfort themselves, get what they want, that's all they're looking at. But if you remove that and you look farther out and you look around and you go, oh, there's more than me here? There's more than just my little life? Do you mean the decisions I'm making might make a difference for more than me and my household? And some never get even past me. There are parents that don't even care about their children. They're just a nuisance. There's churches, there's people, all walks of life, government everywhere, that all they're concerned about is what concerns them right now, right here. And especially if they get a little trouble in life, then it's like it really justifies that they don't need to be concerned about anybody else because I've got a sickness, I got a disease, I've been broke, I've been hurt, and so there's nothing. And I'm telling you, that's being in prison. That's being in bondage. To where your own life and your own circumstances are consuming you to the point. You know, it's amazing, and I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just trying to tell the truth here today of saying you can get into so many prisons. You can get in just that prison of, oh, me, I've got a problem in my life. And the moment you do that, you know what it justifies? It justifies that you don't have to be concerned about anybody else. You don't have to worry about what's going on in the world. You don't have to worry about what's going on in the neighborhood. You don't have to worry about what's going on in the city. You can just take cheap shots at all that because your little life is all messed up. And so, you know, you haven't got time for that. But man, a man of God, a woman of God, somebody that has God's heart, and God himself is always saying, what about the future? And when God was dealing with Abraham, he was dealing for us. And everybody in between us and everybody after us. And so when people say, well, why did this happen to me? It's like, if you could pick up your head and look and see, there's a lot bigger picture than just you getting through life without any scrapes or bumps. And you know that, and I know that. Come on in, kids. And so I just want to tell you where we're at as a church and where I'm at, where I believe we're at in society right now. Is this is not a time to be laying our heads down and tired and weariness. This is not a time for us just to worry about our IRAs. This is a time for us to say, this thing is not over yet. This thing is not finished yet. We don't know when the Lord's coming. We don't know when it's going to end. And people just say, well, America's doomed. And I say, you know, it's definitely doomed if you believe it. If you think it's all over, and yet I'm saying to myself, I'm saying to you, what if God is asking us to step up to the plate? It's always been a remnant. It's always been a few. What if he's asking you? What if he's asking me? What if he's asking us for the bigger picture, not to give up, not to just think right here, but to see a bigger thing that says it's worth the price to live in this freedom that God's given us, to get our victory, to get our forgiveness, and then get our vision up. And so I thought it was just appropriate after all that. What we're going to do is do a baby dedication today. You know, and I know a lot of people, when we do VBS, the people are so grateful, but I know that there's so many people that just have almost no time for kids. You know, I know it bothers people when the kids come in and they're making noise, and boy, we do train them. We do train them to listen. Why? Because literally our freedom's dependent on them. You know, if kids, I was thinking about that young boy I got to deal with. I was just thinking about him. If it might have been only one time, I hope there's more, but if nobody will tell him that he doesn't have to be a victim to his temper, he doesn't have to be a victim to his selfishness. He can get control of it. He can win. You know, if nobody tells you the truth, then you can't walk in the truth. It doesn't come natural. And I'm thinking, what's it going to take in the next decade, the next 20, 30, 40 years? What are our grandchildren going to get to experience in the areas of technology that what's going to come about in the future? And I'm just saying, as much as it's tempting to just be concerned that we get our bills paid and everything else, somebody's got to be thinking about what? About the children need to be trained. And trained for what? Trained to survive? No, trained to thrive. God said, I chose Abraham. Why? Because he will train, command, demand, and educate his kids and his household. Do you know how good Abraham did that? Abraham did it where 5 kings he took after 5 kings that had been wiping everybody out. He took his household, 300 people, and wiped them all out. That's a well-trained house. We need a well-trained house, folks. Let's keep believing for one another.